the Northwest home for paranormal. You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
From the Pacific Northwest and the shadow of the 1962 World's Fair, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are on God's green earth. I am your host, Mario Magana. This is U.S. Phenomenon. We go to the phone lines this evening to chat with someone who has been with us before. His name is Brian. Brian Jones had sent us an email, and we haven't touched base with Brian in some time. Brian has been when he was on with us previously, he was sharing his ability to be an audio psychic communicator. Let's welcome back to U.S. Phenomenon. On the U.S. Phenomenon hotline is Brian Jones. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Mario. Thanks for having me back with you.
Hey, man, it's a pleasure to have you. So since we last had you on the show, I know that a lot of listeners who may be new to the show may not know who you are or your story. So can you briefly kind of get the listening audience, the viewing audience kind of back up to speed on where you've been, who you are and where you've been?
Sure, you bet. And I just want to say this, and I think you'll appreciate it, is I've been listening to Art Bell on Saturday evenings. He's on KVI, as you probably know, right before your show. The Somewhere in Time archive. Boy, what a flashback, from a quarter century ago.
Yes.
And he was a turning point in my life for finding a phenomenon that was pretty wild, and I guess it still is. And a lot of people probably don't even know about it anymore. It kind of died out, but I'd been hearing about him from my mother, and she was telling me some of the guests and some of the topics, and I was at that time, in my early 30s, and I was thinking, boy, that sounds pretty wacky. And she kept telling me that, and then my life was a little interesting at the time, and energetically since I was born, but I had a strange phenomenon happen on the phone that was really powerful, and I was talking with a guy. I was on a probably a flip phone, actually it was a landline cordless, and I know it was more than just some technical glitch. I was talking to a man, and out of nowhere, I was interrupted by what I recognized as the sound of my own voice. And it was really strange and stirring in a super powerful way. And it spooked the hell out of me. And the guy on the other end couldn't hear any of this phenomenon. I said, "Hey, Phil," and my voice is echoing back at me backwards. And 4 hours later, my mother, I talked with her, and she says, "Hey, Brian, Art had a guest with a topic you're going to want to know about." And this was David John Oates, the Australian that was he was from Australia. He was a researcher, the founder and developer of what he called reverse speech. I know that was more than a coincidence. And, so that was back in 1997. And the thing that got me into what I ended up calling audio psychic is, simply put, as David put it and proved and showed with lots of evidence. He was a regular guest on Art's show back in the mid to late 90s. And it was simply, if you record the audio of human speech and play it backwards, you would find embedded messages in there. And anybody could do it that gave it any dedication at all. Sometimes somebody could find it in minutes, or it'd take longer. But that's how I got started on tapping into information of consciousness, or what I like to put two words together: spirit consciousness. That started in 1997, and I put thousands and thousands of hours into it right away, because I was enthralled with it big time.
I know that we have a couple samples that you sent to us, and I'd love to play a piece for someone right now. So I'm going to play
Sure.
audio clip number 2, because for those who are listening to us on our flagship station, KVI, we don't have the rights to. I don't have the rights to play the Art Bell clip unless it was grabbed from via you. So we do have your second audio clip here, and let me play it again. I didn't mean to really interrupt it, but here is audio clip number 2 that you have here. And this one is interesting to me because when you listen to these pieces, now what am I getting here? Let me listen to this again. Now, is this an animal? What is this audio?
Yeah, yeah. I'm the animal, the
Science. Why?
audio animal. Yeah, I was pushing it pretty hard. That that right there, and I see. Here's what I was doing. I wasn't really thinking you'd play them, and I don't mind that you
Oh,
do at
okay.
all. But I was doing this so we'd have a reference point. And I don't know. You read? Did you read what I labeled that as?
I went back and looked at it. Yes, just now. Yeah.
Are you able to make out that phrase? I'm curious because I know other people have.
I was, when I heard it, not wearing my headphones, I was able to, but listening to it
Hmm.
right now is interesting to me
Yeah,
because I am not making out the word, the phrase that is what is written here, which is interesting me to, in review to this. I'm like, wow, why am I not hearing that? Because
yeah. It's
I
funny
was
you
I
should
was
use the word
listening,
review.
right? I wasn't looking at the word, and then I played the audio to see if I could hear to make it out. And now that I've gone back to look at it again, I'm yeah. What's interesting to me when we go through these, I just wanted to give just a little piece of something for our audience who may have not listened to you in the past, kind of get them up to speed on some of the pieces that
Sure.
you've worked on in the past. So
Yeah, it's a really kind of touchy subject with a lot of people. I've noticed like that right there is not human speech. You know, that thing right there. I've noticed, and I've backed away. I haven't really done much actively, even
sure.
for myself. In the last 3 years, I've been a little preoccupied with other events. But the but what I was going to say is there's a very strange thing about, and I don't know how it would be today because I really have kind of kept it to myself for the last few years, maybe 5 years since our last talk with it kind of faded out. I tried a couple other things I'll tell you about, but what a few years into it, oh yeah, let me finish that thought. Back to just telling somebody, if you play recordings of speech backwards, you'll get messages. You get some really spooky reactions. Inherently deep down, I don't know why that is. I think a lot of people just aren't interested in reaching through the veil. I'm kind of wired the opposite of that, but for my own reasons. But what you heard right there was a few years into it, I was getting really frustrated with the basic level of approaching people like with a forensic bent on, hey, I could get information from human speech this way. I mean, I wrote like 50 private investigators locally, and only 2 got back to me, and they did a vanishing act when I sent them some compelling evidence. Never heard from them again. But so I started really, back to another guest on Art Bell show, a man named Mark Macy was playing what he called ITC, instrumental transcommunication, which was using audio recordings and devices. People would try all kinds of experimentation and document in audio uh, messages from, say, spirit. You couldn't really tell where they were coming from. So that was, and I was using that term ITC, instrumental transcommunication, back in that day right there. That right there, that recording was from roughly when I moved over to just manically spending hours and hours and hours trying all kinds of things to open that doorway up to get information because I really wanted it. And that was just some device. I can't even remember. I tried all kinds of non-technical things like an old doorbell with some vibrating apparatus just to cause a background sound that would morph into it. And what I heard of that, and I know other people could hear it too. It sounds a little loud over the phone here. I don't know. Sometimes headphones for me work a lot better. You were saying it was the opposite for you, but what I got out of that was, and by the way, that is dual direction. If you play it's not edited 100% symmetrically, but you would tell that is backwards and forward. So in other words, the first part might be forward. And what I hear of it, if you don't mind me saying that right now, you ready for that?
Sure.
Okay. Get a life review in heaven. And like I said, the get a life review is one direction, and you play that audio backwards, and then it comes out as in heaven. That's the way I hear it very clearly. I know that's a message for me. And like I said, other people have been able to audibly hear that with their ears. But the whole thing is, most of the messages that I get, whether it's recording animals' voices or breathing sounds even, and they carry messages too, it's dual direction. And I think there's a correlation there of being outside the physical, say over into the spiritual realm, because we've probably all heard stories that pay attention to this sort of thing. You hear people that had an NDE, a near-death experience, or possibly a temporary death experience, where they're outside of their body. And I can tell you, my cousin, someone I've known all my life, told me that she was in a medical situation in a hospital, and something went wrong with her IV, and they overdosed her and basically squeezed her out of her body because her body went into some medical trauma. And she remembers so crystal clear being standing in the room, looking across the room at her body in the bed. And she said when she got out of that, when she was out of her body, it was a completely different spectrum of consciousness and awareness. In other words, she told me, and I didn't, back then I was like 17 at the time when she told me this. And I remember her telling me this, and it was put it in the memory bank that added up to all kinds of things that, compelled me to want to do what I'm doing or have done. And she told me that she had this crystal clear awareness, completely different than being in the body, where she could see past, present, and future. So I think the reason I get so many dual direction messages, most 95% of them that are really clear to me, is because they're outside of the physical realm restriction of being here like this. And they do kind of represent nonlinear time. That's what I think, because I've seen it. It's constant.
And this is like completely different than the stuff that maybe are like hidden messages, like for example, in like the Beatles track, when you go and you listen to A Day in the Life, and then there's like that, there's that big, dun, and then at the end there's something at the end, but it's, if you reverse it or whatever.
There's a lot of stuff in music, and some of it is probably intentional for marketing purposes, just to get people talking about you.
Right.
But a lot of it's naturally occurring. I mean, I looked at that song by Queen, which is a very famous song, "We Are the Champions," correct? You know that song. Who doesn't, right?
Sure.
That came out in 1978, I think, or maybe late 77. Well, if you listen to, and I remember I found that I was really thrilled. In fact, I posted that on one of David John Oates' forum boards back in like 1997, or right when I first got going on it. And I remember his reaction. I was getting his attention pretty good. He said, "Brian, your reversals are so clear, they scare me." And he was talking about this one because if you play that Queen song backwards, the title of the song, and I guess it's called the chorus, it's the repeated main lyric of the song, is "We Are the Champions."
Mm-hmm.
You play that backwards, and the phrase is "nightmares that I heal." And I was thinking back to this young lady that I told her I just found it, and she put the headphones on, and I presented it, forward clip like David would do, then the excerpt backwards at the original speed, slowed down slower, then slower again. I just remember her reaction. It's burned in my memory. She listened to that right when that reversal came up of "nightmares that I heal," because it's pretty spooky kind of sounding.
Sure.
But I saw her eyebrows go up at first, and like maybe the second speed and the third speed, she whipped the headphones off and threw them on the table. But anyway, that's one. But back to the musical thing, it's everywhere in there. And I remember telling you the other day when we just had that little chat, it's pretty intriguing. I never met him personally. He heard me on Clyde Lewis's show, and he's a bit of a musician, kind of a recluse. He lives out in the desert in California, and he's probably 75 right now, give or take. But back in the day, he was hanging out with some of those guys down in the Hollywood area, doing live, music gigs. And he sent me some of his homebrewed music that he's been doing in the last few years. But this was like 15 years ago when I contacted him, or vice versa. And I had a driving job, and I was, like I said, thousands and thousands of hours. I just felt like, I heard the thing where Eddie Van Halen used to play his guitar 9 hours a day just to keep pushing it to get his skill level up and style and all that he did. But for many hours, I was listening to some of Johnny's music, And I started noticing in the musical instrumental track part of it, that energy, I started hearing names emerging out. They were all male names. And I made a big list. There was like 12 names on there. And a few days later, when I talked to Johnny about it, I said, "Hey, Johnny, I got a list of names I want to run by you." And he told me that every name on that list were former guys that he knew that were in the music business, and no doubt the heavy drug scene, and pretty wild. He told me Hollywood's an evil place. I remember him telling me that. But you get into that kind of lifestyle, doing drugs and everything, you're probably dealing with a lot of dark forces. So he said that every name on the list that I came up with were guys that he knew that died, probably mostly from drug overdoses or things along those lines. So I'm just saying there's a lot that gets carried in energy, and it's a little bit enigmatic. It might spook a lot of people, but I always was so like I said, pushing myself so hard for the discovery angle. I was too busy to be worried or scared about anything. I wasn't careless about it. You listen to people say, "Yeah, you don't play with a Ouija board and you don't do all this sort of thing." But I'm thinking, you know what? Just being alive is dangerous. You want to kind of be a little proactive. I'm different. I don't expect everybody to have my passion for this sort of thing, but it was always about accessing information. And like I said, for me, I just want to say I probably never would have done this had I not been born super manic and a little bit sensitive to a lot of things that make me uneasy all around. It doesn't bother me 24/7, but boy, I can sure feel that sort of thing. So that's why I really had a special need to want to try to reach through the veil, if you want to call it that, to get information that I could feel, but I couldn't put my finger on.
Do you feel like in your day-to-day life, sharing some of your past here and up to your present, do you feel like the energy that is around you sometimes just drains you with so much going on? I mean, if you're hearing these echoes within your own head, it's almost like for those that are in the business or for those who are listening, that is it like a half second, like hearing yourself and almost a little bit of a delay? Or is it like you hearing yourself talk stacked up on each other?
I'm not really sure how to answer that, other than you just brought me back to, once again, a time period when I was staying at my cousin's house when I was 17, and that, a lot of things change as you go through more and more years. I've realized there's a correlation almost between being human and computers. I mean, you can get too much information that'll lock up the computer. You can get viruses, the whole bit.
Sure.
But back when I was 17 in 1979, I remember I was in a kind of a calm mood, and those kind of stand out. And I was realizing that I felt like I wasn't hearing my own voice in my head. It almost felt like I was listening to like male resonant DJ voices, like 3 or 4 of them going on at the same time. This is just one example that stuck in my mind from way back when I was walking down the street, and I realized, caught my attention. So I'm hearing these voices. I hear what they're saying, but the second that they're done, I cannot recall it. There's another bit of frustration about something just outside of consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that answers your question or not, but my mind's really active. I mean, I really have a hard time meditating. And yeah, that was one of the things a note I was going to say is, for me, there's a lot of training out there, and I'm sure it's real because I know there's all these signals and information all around us in a different dimension or part of the spectrum. And some people can actually meditate and train themselves to pick up on these signals quietly within themselves. Because my mind's so manic, and I'm really hyper still, and this is a way of me being able to override the fact that if my life depended on it, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to quiet my mind and meditate. So this is ideal for me because it's hands-on. You can focus and you can burn off energy while you're doing it.
And since you were last on, and I know that you said that you spend most of your time when you listen to the flagship station, listening to Art Bell, who precedes us or is before us on our flagship station, KVI. If you're a huge Art Bell fan, like our guest here, Brian, and myself, when I, worked at, Boeing back in the day, it was just nice on my drive home, on my commute home, or even at night, just to be able to listen to art if we were working OT, to be able to have that companionship. And we, it's such an honor to be able to go to be on After Art, as he flanks a great program to hand it off to us, to have these conversations locally here in the Pacific Northwest and beyond as well. I mean, so it's always interesting to me when we have callers and guests and like yourself who have been a part of the show to share their stories, because look, it's your story, it's your encounter, it's what you've done, and it takes a lot to share these stories with others, because there are multiple people out here who want to share their story and just don't have the capacity to share. And someone like yourself who's been out here, who has done so much research and even, developing new tools for yourself, I want to kind of get into that. I want to share a picture. If you're watching us on the US Phenomenon website, you can go to my website, onairmario.com. Just you can watch the stream, and we'll have photos and stuff like that available on the podcast on our website for those maybe listening and driving right now. So go to my website if you'd like to see a picture. Brian, why don't you share to us where you've been since you last came on, and share what you sent us as a picture that I want you to describe to our viewing and listening audience, what you've been working on.
Okay, yeah, I'll focus on that one thing,
Sure.
the device that you have in the picture. It's just basically a four-sided pyramid cone. There's a speaker inside there, and very well insulated. And at the top of it, you'll see like a light kind of rose reddish fabric cover. That's kind of like a speaker grill. The sound comes up out of there, and then I've got an old cone speaker I built with 9 sides on it. That was a tribute to John Lennon, by the way. But
Nice.
it's made out of wood, and I've got a switch. I don't know if it showed up in the picture. It probably
does.
is down below there. There's an antique telegraph key.
Yeah.
I use my foot on that. So what it is anybody that's experimented with like the EVP, the electronic voice phenomenon thing, whatever. But there was something called the EVP maker, and basically it was just taking bits and pieces of speech, chopping them all up, and then you play it. And that's the whole thing, is like the buzzing sound where that message came through for me, is this spirit consciousness will kind of grab onto that and articulate what sounds like speech, a verbal message. So what I've got inside that speaker, or the pyramid, is just a speaker inside a cone that aims it up through the top, shoots it out at a 90-degree angle, slightly upward. That's not critical, but I'm just trying to give a visual of it. And so what I do is I do these sessions and I record, and I'm using cassette tape for a couple reasons. Not that it's necessary. It's just that in all the days, if I ever want to analyze speech, because it can take some time and some focus, and the best concentration I ever had was walking down a trail or somewhere down the sidewalk, or even driving for that matter, with a set of headphones on, because I've modified a full-size cassette deck that I can flick a switch back and forth in like a fraction of a syllable. And I don't have to look at anything. It helps when I'm walking and moving. So I don't know, just frees everything up. So what I do with these recording sessions, I have a cassette deck on one side of my room, and I actually built a microphone chamber. And I spent, like I said, thousands of hours doing this in years. I kind of got tired of the resistance from approaching people for practical reasons with what David called the reverse speech thing. So I kind of said, okay, I don't need any other incarnates here. They seem to be spooked by this. So I did a lot of experiments into what, as I was saying, we called ITC, deliberately trying to open the doorway up to get some information back and forth. Maybe I can get answers to my questions through this device. It's very cryptic. It takes a lot of energy, which I haven't had for the last few years. The last few years I've been preoccupied with other things, but I have not forgotten this. But this may be a little amusing. I've got my own terms, because I've just, there's no rules on this sort of thing.
Sure.
I call what comes up out of the signal tower that I actuate with my foot. Like I'll ask a question and then I'll hit that and that sound starts coming up. I'm across the room with a microphone in a hardwood chamber. And this is, I'll give my trademark secret here. I'm kidding, but for a while I wouldn't because for other reasons, and this is part of the formula. So you've got these chopped up sounds, and I'll tell you what the main essence of that is, because that's the amusing part, I think. But what I do, and for people that may know about this and are trying this, it's just funny because listening to Art Bell now, like last night he had a show from 2002, I believe it was. That was a quarter century ago almost. Well, almost. And some of his other shows are from the late 90s. And boy, it's a mind blower that, here you're listening to Art and he's as alive as he was in the connection we have listening to him on the radio. We weren't shaking hands with him. We weren't in the room with him physically when he was talking to us. So the whole thing's a big circle right now. But back to the microphone chamber, because this is for people that may be interested in doing this sort of thing. I developed this myself, and it really kind of kicked it down the road a lot faster to make it more effective. I've got a microphone inside a wooden chamber, old vintage small microphone. And when I actuate that carrier track with my foot through that switch, telegraph key, I use my hand on the open end of this wooden chamber, which is cylindrical and long, and I valve it with my hand, which also causes a chopping effect. And the combination of the chopped up phonetic syllables, chopped up, by the way, they're backwards, forwards, layered. And here's a part you might find amusing. I wanted to kind of get, like the human voice aspect. I wanted a male and a masculine and a feminine. So I went back in time and I grabbed a bit of audio of Vincent Price promoting a TV show from 1958, and then for the male aspect of it. And then for the female voice, feminine voice, it was Elizabeth Montgomery back in the day when she was starring on Bewitched, but it was a 1966 interview, just to go back in time, since time's an illusion anyway, right? I mean, we're here for a limited amount of time, but
that's right.
And then the other thing I added in there that seemed to enhance it, and I still get a smile when I think about it. I was grabbing all kinds of samples, and there was a short video on YouTube of a humpback whale doing the backstroke around a dock, and the thing was you could just tell that thing was having a good day, just happy as anything. People were smiling and laughing, looking at this whale swimming around a dock. So those are the three main things, and I tweaked it, EQ'd it, did all that. And I've done so much to that carrier track, enhancing it. It doesn't really matter, really. I mean, I've recorded. I have a part in my bedroom right here, like right next to where the signal tower is sitting in that picture. In fact, here, let me show you. I don't know if those squeaky sounds came through. I already know for a fact from experience, if I was to start recording that by squeaking the floor and putting my weight on it like I just did,
right,
I'd get messages out of that too. It's just carrying in this consciousness that morphs into pseudo speech.
Our guest this evening, Brian Jones. What would your technical? I guess. What would your do we still call you an audio psychic? What do we call you now?
No, I don't think I have a title. I'm the reason I said
researcher,
use that term audio.
Researcher,
more of an experimenter or explorer, really.
Yeah,
because that's what I've done. It's just a lot of experimental things, kind of without being too serious minded about it or try to pin anything down. And but yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought there. But I was just going to say this applies to a lot of things, and I was going to say the animal kingdom. I recorded a lot of animals, and they're not below us because they can't drive a car. They're operating from a way different level. I think they're a lot more linked to the spirit realm. In other words, they may not have the blindfold or the amnesia that we have, because some of the phrases that I've gotten out of dogs, especially when I shifted over to what I call the animal communication, back to the audio psychic thing. I just want to say this. So I'm using audio tracks, right? For the reason I mentioned, for me, it's not like trying to quiet my mind. It's way more complementary to my manic mind, and it helps me do it. I don't have to sit still. It's not necessary to quiet my mind. So, but the audio psychic is, so you're using audio tracks, but there is definitely a psychic component, because I've gotten information like out of my electric guitar where, I'll just give you an example, because I have this audio track too. I used to play it, and what it was, I was getting to know this lady over the phone. I never met her, and we talked for a couple months, and I'd done so much of this ITC, call it, and where there was no physical body around. It wasn't the aim. I was just really trying to tune into the messages. So I just thought this was amusing that I was talking to this lady for, I think it was up to 2 months over the phone. And not once did I ever say, "Hey, what do you look like?" And about 2 months into it, we had one of our conversations. I was really impressed with the fact that we would email back and forth, and she would put a lot of time into super meticulous communication details, right? So about 2 months into it, we had a conversation, and we hung up, and then she calls me back, and she was really excited because she was a pretty serious-minded person, and I guess I am too in some ways. And she was all of a sudden out of character, real happy, like a younger person. And she says, "Hey, Brian, I just realized you don't even know what I look like." And I thought to myself, yeah, I guess I don't. So she told me where I could go look at a picture of her. And I did. And so I see this lady, kind of pretty, leaning against a tree in a forest. And I thought to myself, boy, I sure have changed over the years. Right. So I just felt this thing come over me like, yeah, lighten up a little bit, but not all the way. So I knew her name as Caitlin, right? So I was, that kind of like, uh, made me realize, well, I got to lighten up a little bit, sort of, as much as I can. So I said, "Hey, let's try to get a little good energy across to Caitlin." Because I was really, like I said, every day wanting to kind of keep momentum and build up communication with spirits, shall we say, or consciousness. And and I just had this little melody I was doing for guitar practice, and I thought she might like it. So I went in my recording room, and I said, "All right, good spirits, help me get some good energy across to Caitlin." So I just played it. It's about a 20-second clip. And one part of it, I stretch one of the strings, it gets kind of a high tone. And so, of course, I couldn't leave that alone after I sent it to her. She liked it, by the way. And then I put it on the cassette tape, and I was down at Golden Gardens on the beach. I remember when I found this. That part where I stretch the string, I get a dual direction message out of it where it says, "Marianne, he loves you," right? And I'm critiquing it. I'm kicking its tires. I'm thinking, that sounds like Median. And the "he loves you" is playing its dual direction. One direction says the Marianne, backwards. The flip side of that is "he loves you," right? I'm just saying I was feeling affection for her, so it kind of fits. But here's the thing. It took me 2 weeks because I kept saying, "That's Median." And then I realized, no, it's meaning to tell me Marianne. So I got my nerve up, and I asked Caitlin, I said, "Hey, does the name Marianne mean anything to you?" And she told me that was the name she was given at birth by her parents. But over the years, she had kind of an estranged relationship. She changed her name legally many years before. She also told me that the only people that she could think of that would call her Marianne were her parents or her one brother, all three who were deceased for a number of years at that point. So I grabbed that name out of somewhere, and that's what I'm saying. Get information that, how would I know?
Right.
And, I'm not saying I know that it was her mother, father, brother, or a blend of them all, in the oneness now. I don't know.
It's interesting when you
but
say,
I've gotten a lot of things that way that are pretty perplexing.
when you say that, these messages, when you're, for just as that example where you're,
Mario?
yeah. Can you hear me okay? Are you still there? I hear you. I got you. You still got me? Brian? Brian? Hello? Did we lose you, Brian? I got you. Hello, hello, hello. Brian?
Oh, I guess I'll try calling you.
We got you. You're there. Let's see. We'll call him back here. See if we can get this thing to connect in. I'm not sure what happened there. Why we lost him.
Hi, this is Brian Jones, and you've reached.
As we wait for Brian to call us back, it's interesting to me when you listen to him speak in regards to his piece there, where he was talking about how he was able to disseminate that information about her and her biological name. I'm curious to find out where that comes from.
Mario?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. You were there. I could hear you this entire time.
Oh, really? Well, I couldn't hear you.
So, before we lost you, or you lost me, or however that the case may be, I was about to ask you a question in regards to you putting that melody to send her the vibe. Where do you think that, like, and I know you were sharing that you didn't know any of that previous information about her changing her name or anything of that nature. Do you feel like how does that make you feel or sit with you when you get these hidden messages or these messages listening to the audio? What made you even think about listening to the track backwards and forwards to hear if there was any hidden messages within something that you were sending to her? I mean, is that something that you always do in regards to that? I mean, it's curious because I'm like, wow, how did he find that little nugget in there?
Oh, look, as I used to jokingly say, I used to analyze everything in dual direction that moved or didn't move. I just did it because back to, and I know I mentioned guitar and I mentioned Eddie Van Halen. Trust me, I'm not a guitar player, but I'm just saying that concept that stuck in my mind about him was 9 hours a day, just pushing it. And obviously the guy developed a very unique skill that made him world famous. And not that I ever wanted to be famous. I really have never had that interest. I'm just saying, pushing the boundaries, just keep pushing it. Sometimes that's how you do it. I mean, like even mining for gold, you chip away with a pickaxe or whatever the heck they do. Sometimes you got to do it for years and years. And the more you do it, the more chance you have of striking gold. So that was it. I was just every day of my life. I mean, I had a pizza delivery job in the evening dinner time deal. And I had already have like 9 or 10 hours in of racing to the thrift store to get some more electronics to dissect. I mean, I spent, when I say thousands of hours, I'm just saying it was to me always, I could always, in my mind, I never regret being that obsessed with putting so much time in, because even to this day, I think it's mighty important. I mean, I used to watch, I don't know if you're familiar with the show that was roughly in 1961, give back. It was on for a couple seasons, called One Step Beyond. Some of the stuff that they presented on there, some of it may have been based on documents. Entertainment is, they got to embellish a lot, but that stuff really just got to my core. Like some of these things just, really choked me up. Like you'd see these things about how the spirit world outside of this linear time illusion we're living in, this short-lived thing, the communication would really be very important for really deep reasons to a lot of people. That's why I was really obsessed with it. And like I said, I've never lost interest in it. I haven't had the energy to really do it the last few years. I'm dealing with some more earthly things right now on a daily basis. And boy, is this world complicated right now. I've been around, I was born in 62, and it's always been complicated, but there's a lot of information coming out right now that, well, I guess I don't know, maybe some of the stuff I've done helping me cope with it, but it's hard to decipher a lot right now. So I haven't had the energy to do it much recently, but anyway, and I want to say the thing that you could not play, just tell people and see, were you able to hear the message as I had it labeled? Can we talk about it? I mean, even we can. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we can.
Were you able to hear that message? Because I've been told that one's just super clear.
Let me go back and pull up those two pieces real quick. When you were talking about that TV show and some of these things, for those who may, a lot of our listeners who were born after this was a radio show, right? Is that correct?
No, it was television.
It was a television.
One step beyond what, yeah, it was. And I mean, I never saw it till it was, 20 years into reruns. So it's still out there.
Yeah. Oh, so this went against was produced by the same people that produced the Twilight Zone. Interesting. Very
and it was about the same time era too.
Yeah.
Late 50s, early 60s.
Let me go back and let me pull up my emails real quick and stand by.
This is the one that you said you couldn't play because of copyright. It was a segment of Art Bell show.
Yes, I definitely
Richard Hoagland.
Yeah, I did listen to that. I did hear the message in that one, and I was like, oh yeah, you definitely can hear.
Yeah, I'd like to say just to kind of validate that this is a valid way of getting information in its own unique way. That was Richard Hoagland on with Art Bell in 1998, I think it was.
Right.
And he's talking about, they had a guy on there that was kind of trashing him on the internet. And Richard's calling him on it. He says, the things you have called me on the internet, and he's talking about these radio shows. This guy had a little limelight there for a short period of time. I never took him too seriously, but I'm not even going to mention his name. But Richard's calling him out for trashing him on the internet. And right when he says, for instance, some material that was sent to me, that phrase right there, material that was sent to me, and going in with a scalpel, it was material that was sent to me, like cutting off the E at the end of me.
Right.
You flip that backwards, and I've been told this one's super clear, is this message is a lawyer's, right?
Now that audio, where did you get that audio from? Was that YouTube, or where did you get that from? Was that from?
Oh, I actually recorded. I used to record the AM radio onto cassette tape.
Got it.
And I've actually got a reversal on Art Bell from 1998. In fact, I've got thousands of samples, but back to this one here, because I actually got direct feedback. Are you familiar with who Richard Hoagland is? I don't even know if he's still alive. He was an absolute regular guest, very intelligent guy. He was a science advisor to Walter Cronkite. I
do remember Richard C. Hoagland, but I don't know if he's still alive. That's a great question.
Yeah. It's funny that quarter century can get away from you. Looking back in time, it's a whole new perspective for me. But
yes,
I actually had contact back and forth through email with Richard's Enterprise Mission webmaster, a guy named Mike Barra.
Yeah.
And I was so lit up when I played that for a few friends. They're like, man, that one's clear. And this is the point I want to make about pinpoint information and how this backward speech can work like a folding knife. The backwards and forwards makes a full sentence. So out of material that was sent to me, I'll just get those front and back extras on there. The phrase, he's talking about somebody sending him information, exposing this other guy for what he's doing, trashing him on the internet.
Right.
And so the backwards phrase was, this message is a lawyer's. And to me, like I said, I think you heard it too. So I got Mike Barrett to talk to Richard about it. And he said that the material that was sent to him was sent to him by Peter Gersten. At the time, his claim to fame, as well as being an attorney, was he was the UFO attorney. I forget for which outfit. But if you think about it, material that was sent to me was actually sent to him by an attorney. And the flip side of material that was sent to me was, this message is a lawyer's. So I'm just saying that was a pretty compelling thing to show you that there's additional information right there that's like bullseye. And in fact,
and when you listen to that, because it was just regular speech between Art and Richard C. Hoagland, it's interesting that the underlying tone of where you were able to get that information out of that piece, it's within its own. I think what's interesting to me about this whole piece is that when you listen to that piece, which we can't play on the radio, is that it's normal conversation for those to paint the picture, as you're saying, that it's just a regular conversation between Richard Hoagland and Art, and then you were able to disseminate through that conversation, going backwards and forwards, that information. Now, how long does it take you most of the time? I mean, you're like going back and forth, like going through this audio, right, to see if you're hearing anything. And I can't even imagine how much time is spent going through that, to get that piece. Now, in your past research, have you ever
Mhm.
gone down the realms of some of these other people? You're like, I know you were talking about earlier about how you've talked to private investigators or investigators and things of that nature. Uh, have you ever taken audio from, like, really, I don't even know. We'll just, for example, Ted Bundy. Have you ever taken audio from Ted and like disseminated and gone through some of his stuff before to maybe help out a
Not,
case?
not. I don't think I've ever analyzed any speech recordings of Ted Bundy, but I did that. I did that with John Wayne Gacy. If we're talking about serial killers with a
Right.
pretty, pretty devilish, demonic, pretty creepy stuff.
Sure.
But do you remember who John Wayne Gacy was?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, he was a monster of all monsters.
He had some really, I mean, yeah, I'm not an educated psychologist or anything like that. I just, go for the simple communication. But some of his reversals were really bizarre. He was calling himself Godzilla backwards. I mean, I'm just, yeah, I'm not sure. Remind me what your question was about that. Oh, yeah,
Just
not Ted Bundy, but I did do that to try to hear the inner dialogue of some pretty diabolical serial killers. And yeah, there's messages in there for sure. But like I said, in fact, God, I can't even remember what it was. Yeah, I ate Charles Manson, things like that.
mhm.
Wasn't my favorite thing, but yeah, of course you can get messages out of everything. And before I forget, I want to say this because this is something I tried to do at the tail end of my career of reaching out to people to try to do something practical.
Sure.
I never, just in the last few years, I think, like I said, I kind of let this die out for a while, but I would always was thinking I can get messages out of squeaky door hinges and things like that. The consciousness is carried in there. And I thought, how perfect would it be to analyze the incoherent sounds of somebody that had a severe stroke, that could not articulate speech, could not use their hands, are really bad. They're frustrated. They're trapped in a body. And I thought, I wonder how sharp their mind is, and they can't write with their hand. They can't speak with their mouth, their tongue, whatever. They can't get the message across. I thought how powerful it would be if you could, because some people come back from being that debilitated, especially with the speech and everything, and even paralysis, where it takes time, but their brain reconfigures itself. Kind of like, what do they call that? What's that term for the hard drive where you, I don't know.
Reformat.
Yeah, something like that. But no, there's another one, defragment, right?
Oh,
But
defragment. Yeah.
but I had some ethics about this sort of thing. Not always. I mean, I was like, I didn't really think of other people's sensitivities and feelings about it. But when it came to the stroke thing, I thought how devastating that is for the person and their family or caregivers, whatever. It's a pretty devastating thing. So I never just went and grabbed that stuff. I went out of my way to join Facebook pages for like support groups for stroke patients and for survivors and things. And I said, does anybody have any interest in what I'm presenting here or proposing? I said, and if not, where could I ethically obtain some audio, like I'm telling you, very impaired speech? And I struck out for a long time, left it alone, went back a couple years later, and I actually found a Facebook group and put that proposal out there. And somebody got back to me, guy in his 70s who had a stroke himself. He was pretty well recovered, probably had some residuals. I never really picked his brain about that too much. But we spoke on the phone, and he said, "Sure, I'll help you out." He had a episodes on YouTube of a chat of like the one that he showed me, that he said, "Here's one for you." And he pointed to a certain man that had what they call aphasia, which I guess is a certain condition. I couldn't tell you the clinical definition of it. Bruce Willis, I think, has that now. And so this man's name was Ralph, and he pointed to this guy. And I'll just say it because this was a public thing. It was another guy that did some television acting, I think. And he had a stroke, and it took away his, life as he knew it. He could speak, but you could hear what he was saying, but he had this aphasia thing where he could not form sentences correctly, like I probably can't right now. But the thing is, so Ralph sent me one, and I was eager to hear it. It was a YouTube video, and I just was listening to it while I was driving with the headphones on. And I'm thinking, oh, great. Here he's pointing to Carl McIntyre, the one of the 5 people in this group. And when this guy's talking, there's a static on the audio recording. And I'm so frustrated from a lot of things over the years. I was like, yeah, great. The audio's impaired. So I come home with that, put it on the PC where I can use my audio editing, slow it down, and headphones, got a graph. I can kind of dissect it even more. I call it the audio microscope. And I realized that static is only happening when Carl's talking. And within seconds, I realized it's got verbal information within it. And the one phrase that I got right away within minutes was a phrase as Carl's talking. Over the top of his voice, here's a staticky interference. And the phrase I get is, Carl was tough rider. And I think that was a part of himself, just because they're talking about how it affected his life, having a stroke and all that. It was tough for him. He was riding it out but right. The whole thing is, here's the static from an altered brain putting out these strange signals, which are carrying information. And so at that point, I was really excited. I said, wow, this guy's going to want to know about this. So I got a hold of Ralph. I presented it as, clipped it out, slowed it down, presented it to him. And I said, Ralph, check this out. I said, this is what that static is. Listen to this. He said he could hear the message, but he didn't know what it meant. And I said, well, yeah. I said, listen, I got a lot to say about this. I said, why don't you have me on one of your episodes and we'll talk about it. And I never heard from the guy again. And I'm just saying, that's why that was kind of like the final end of really trying to reach out to others, because I can only go so far as doing anything really phenomenal to help people or breakthrough or scientific discovery, whatever it is. So that was kind of like the tail end of me reaching out to people. And that was about 5 years ago, I think. But I just wanted to say that there's a lot of possibilities, like with the animals and all that sort of thing, or the signal tower.
Sure. I mean, and when you think about it, there are, the communication between, animals, different of different species and whatnot, whales having some type of dialogue, a dialect of language with their communication. I mean, you can go in so many different directions with this. I mean, with the real quick, with the energy that you're talking about, getting, phrases and words and things from, the ambience of the air of a room, is quite interesting to me, but that must take time, Brian.
Oh yeah. Hey, listen, I know that's the other thing. Yeah, no, I was extremely obsessed and I was so enthralled. I mean, even when I got out of Seattle in 2015 and I moved to this little town, I kept it going. I really had to back off about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago for the world really kind of hit the lightning round about that time for me, in my perspective. But I was kind of doing a lot of R&D on credit cards. So yeah, I'm kind of catching up I'm taking care of the more earthly things right now. I've got a job. I don't have the time and energy. It was extremely time and energy demanding. But I was really pushing. I want to say that, I'll say about one thing that was intriguing about animals, because it's kind of standalone. There's a lady in England that I got to know through forum boards or whatever. She's got a real talent with this ITC thing. In some ways, I could see why she was frustrated, because she met a lot of resistance too. She came up with some pretty compelling things, but she really loves animals, and she has wild foxes that come in her yard and she feeds them. And she sent me recordings of foxes, and they have a really shrill, super high pitched voice. I found out by slowing that stuff way, way down, I was getting phrases, like full sentences out of these foxes. And I ran them by Allison, and she says, yeah, that totally makes sense. They were talking about the rain and thanking her for taking, helping her. I don't even know where those audios are, but I'm just saying it's pretty amazing what can be perceived this way. It's like I said for me, but
Sure. I mean, and what's interesting to me is the research that you've done within what you did when you first came on the show, years ago. I can say that now. Wow, that's crazy to think that. And then what you've done up to now, and kind of like revamping yourself, kind of continuing your research with this, with new tool sets and things that you shared with us tonight. A picture is here on the stream. If you're interested in watching, you go to my website, onairmario.com, and you can watch the YouTube show right there. Just click on it and you can see the picture. We'll have it also posted so that you can see it in the podcast as well. If you're not I can't even speak. If you're not a podcast subscriber, all you have to do is go to your favorite podcasting platform, search US Phenomenon with Mario Magana, or go to my website, onairmario.com, and click on the podcast button, and then you can subscribe that way as well. Before we get out of here, Brian, if someone was interested in working with you, where would you tell them to go? Would you want them to contact us? Would you want them to directly reach out to you? What would you say to someone out there who is very curious and intrigued or interested in contacting you?
Well, I'd give out my email address right here, and like I said, if they prefer to contact you, since you kind of made that offer, yeah. Anyway, yeah, if somebody's serious minded, I mean, like I said, I'm not looking to do this for kicks or
Sure.
anything like that, but I certainly have learned a lot, and I've got a lot of pointers. And if somebody really had a passion for something, I'd certainly give them some pointers from my experience. But if you don't mind, I'll give you my email address, my main email address.
Sure, go ahead.
Which is Inventor, Inventor 2012 at yahoo.com. I've had that one forever, way before 2012, which came and went. But and if I'd like to ask you this, were you able to hear that really kind of squeaky, growly sound, that the phrase that I had labeled as "the hours with you, we are glad"? Were you able to make that out?
I didn't even, let's play it real quick. Let's play it. Yes, I mean that is like clear as day when you listen to that audio.
I thought so too, but hey, I just want to say this: there are things to me that are clear as anything, unmistakable, and other people cannot hear them. Just like the Marianne, some people cannot phonetically hear that. In fact, a lot of that stuff they can't. That's why the Richard Hoagland one, I got kind of a consensus that people are like, "Whoa, that is really clear," but I can't tell because there is a psychic component, yes, audio. That's why I say audio psychic. But that one right there, I just want to say,
it is clear. I
spent 14 hours back in, that was about 2002 also, somewhere right after my dad had passed on, and I had moved into his house with my brother. And I remember that day I found a piece of copper thin sheet of flashing out in the backyard. And I spent hours and hours. I sanded it, I cleaned it, made it shiny, and I made a chamber, like a pod, an acoustic pod out of it. Made this platform. I still have the thing. It's inside another thing I spent 2 months building now. But that very day, and while I was doing it, I was like, all right, spirit, like really friendly, reaching out. I go, I know you guys want me to keep doing this because you want to, you want to be able to communicate, for people to hear you and things like that. And it was I thought a positive purpose. So 14 hours into it, I did that recording, and what that is right there, because I know I'm part of the circuit, that's kind of how it goes. But that right there was me. I wetted the tip of my finger, and I had set a lead crystal stemware wine glass on top of this acoustic chamber. And I just was running my finger around the rim of the glass, and it morphed into that.
Our guest this evening, Brian Jones, hanging out with us.
Hey, listen, are you there?
Yes, I can
I
hear.
don't hear you again. And here's another thing: when just even discussing this can bring up this very strange energy that can interfere with electronics.
Well, I guess
It's
that
been a
might be
while,
that
but
might be the case.
I didn't think it would happen again today. I don't know if you can on your side.
Yeah, I can hear you, Brian. I'm not sure how we
Yeah,
lost.
you know what? Maybe I better hang up again, and you can give me a call back. Or if we're close enough to the end, Mario, I'll just say thank you for having me on.
Well,
because I know we're getting to the top of the hour.
We
here,
are
so
close to the
I'm
end.
going to hang up and
we'll
call me back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's call him right back so we can wrap this thing up from the Pacific Northwest. Quite interesting to see that us getting some type of spirit or some type of interference in regards to the connectivity between us and Brian. So Brian, welcome back to the show. Are you there?
Oh yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, it's interesting how we're as we're getting close. I was just you were sharing the stuff about the wine glass. We had all of that stuff down. I wanted to play the audio one more time before we wrap things up from the Pacific Northwest. Just to kind of is that audio 3? Here we go. Let's play this one. Play it one more time.
Uh-oh. I have a feeling. Oh, you're there. Okay, good.
Yeah, no.
Getting nervous.
So as we get close to wrapping things up, if you're interested in working with Brian or you want to contact him, you can email Brian or you can contact us and we can get you in communication with him. Give your email out one more time as we wrap things up.
Sure. It's inventor2012@yahoo.com. And if I could just say one last thing real quick, because people might find this intriguing about the interference with electronics and things.
Yeah.
It's not spooky. I've never had anything. I mean, look, this isn't what brought up like dark forces around. They're all around us all the time. And some of them are pretty active. So it's never been a problem, but I've had some strange phenomenons happen. And I'll just tell you one of them. It's happened twice or 3 times since I've been in this little town here, which is I have a bunch of vintage LED digital clocks. You plug them in, right, like a microwave clock. In fact, that's one of them that was affected. If you unplug those for half a second, they start flashing, all of them. And they may move up, but they'll start at 12 or whatever. I've had more than one time all my digital clocks like that you cannot unplug for half a second, running exactly 2 minutes behind time. And I set my clocks that way using my phone, like you wouldn't believe, meticulously. So somebody's trying to get my attention sometimes. It hasn't happened for a while because I let this stuff kind of subside. So I just wanted to say that they affect electronics. I think trying to get your attention. And if you think about that phrase right there, that was a 14-hour day, me talking, saying, I want to help bring a way of bridging this communication. And the fact is, like, the hours with you, we are glad. It's like some, the cheering section from the other side, I think, letting you know that they appreciate it.
Our guest this evening, Brian, thank you so much for hanging out with us as we wrap things up.
From real pleasure. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure. Someone who is a fellow fan of Art Bell AB as we wrap things up from the Pacific Northwest. If you'd like to be in contact with Brian, you can send him an email. We'll have his information posted in the podcast. Go to my website, onairmario.com. Click on the podcast button to subscribe or go send me a text, 775-990-5151. As we wrap things up from the Pacific Northwest, I'd like to thank our guest, Brian, again. From my entire team, Mark Christopher, Sophia Magana, and myself, Mario Magana. Be sure to look up at the sky because you never know what you might see. Good night.